Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this Broadcast live stream Monday night. And joining me tonight is a good friend, one hell of a free marketeer, powerful voice for freedom, liberty, economic justice, Mpiyakhe, all of the above. Welcome, Mr. Dhlamini, to my very discombobulated podcast. How are you doing?
No, I'm good, man, and I hope everyone watching this, and I hope you're also good, bro. Like it's, I'm also a fan of yours. Like you are my go-to gun guy. While you and Jonathan Wright. So like whenever I have a gun question, like man, whenever I have a gun question for friends that need advice or for articles, I always come to you. So.
Well, awesome. Thank you. I'm glad I can be of service. And I think we were just having a talk about the fact that there's been a bit of a mass awakening in South Africa about important issues that touch people's immediate lives, and that you said people are tired of being lied to, and I fully agree. But before we get to the exciting gun stuff, you touched on something that really resonates with me. And just by the way, sorry, Clarissa, that was due to me being shitty at organizing. I'll give you a call tomorrow. I've got your number.
It sounded like a bad day, like you never got back to me.
It's almost, she's offering to help me organize my emails and my nonsense, and I need a lot of help with that, and communication in general.
I'm in the same space, but like I actually wanted to hire someone, but the only thing that's stopping me is like, I'm scared. Like I feel like I can't even offer someone a job because whatever I offer, I give them would feel like it's too low, and then they'll feel insulted, and then I'll be this bad guy. So you sort of see what employers go through in South Africa because I'm going through the same thing. I can't even offer anyone. It's just one of those things.
I feel your pain. I do, and sort of segueing exactly off that, but not entirely. You're a big. You did a lot of work recently on international currency depreciation. You said it got your lowest post-engagement article engagement, or among the lowest that you've experienced.
Tell
me a bit about that problem.
Well, what happens is usually every once in a while I write an article on the monetary system, monetary policy, currency devaluation, inflation, interest rates, all of those things, and those articles don't do as well. Like even the discussion itself just doesn't do as well. And anyway, so it's just like I think it's going to be one of the biggest issues. I mean, if you look across all of the indicators, interest rates across the world, like this is uniform for everyone, are at the lowest they've ever been as far in all of recorded human history. Now this is going back 5,000 years or even more in some cases. So and then you see commodities, they are the lowest they've ever been. Government bonds, they are the highest they've ever been. So the US debt, the government debt market in the USA has been in a bull market for the past 40 years. So all of those things for me, they indicate one and only one thing, and that's inflation, and debt is the highest it's ever been. So all of those factors, I just add on, they mean only one thing, inflation. So I think it's and investors are aware. They're really sophisticated, smart investors are aware. That's why you see the price of gold going up, even things like the PGM start to go up. But I think the people I worry about are just ordinary people who are going to be wiped out, especially in South Africa, where a lot of people save through their retirement annuity and so on. So that's just I don't know. It feels like it's one of those things that. It's almost impossible to warn people about, because in the short term, inflation feels really good. I think there's a lot of historical evidence for that. So when the Reserve Bank and the government get really going, with printing money and easy monetary policy, we are all going to enjoy it. Interest rates are going to be even lower than this. I mean, imagine if you could finance a mortgage with, let's say, 3% a year. I mean, that would be a dream for everyone. So
it sounds amazing, doesn't
it? Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So those things are always attractive to everyone. I mean, even you or I would start to think about taking on that if it's so cheap.
Debt that we otherwise would be unable to afford. And I think a big reason why people clutch out when you start talking about things like high commodity prices, historically low commodity prices and high prices for government debt, they didn't understand quite what that means. So plain English language, when government debt is really, when government, the price of government debt or buying government debt is very high, Mpiyakhe, now correct me if I'm putting this wrong, that means that there's an excessive amount of government debt going around, or rather that its price is being bid up. For what reason? What are the underlying reasons why government debt gets more expensive, or rather that the prices of government bonds get more expensive?
It's because, like, over the years, especially in the USA, because they are the reserve currency of the world, like every other currency is sort of backed up by the US currency. So what has happened there is that the prices of bonds have kept going up because it was seen as a safe haven. Like the US economy was the strongest economy when the system began. So there was that trust in the US dollar. It was, I think, it was the biggest industrial economy at the time, and it was subsequently replaced. But back then, it was a solvent nation. It was the biggest creditor nation. Their net investment position, like, it was positive. It's negative now, and it's been negative for many years. So they had all of these advantages, which allowed these countries to trust them. And once these countries trusted them, especially investors, as an investor, like, you need a strategy to manage cash. You need there's something to manage liquidity in the course of your investments. And so the US government bonds allow you to do that because they are liquid. Everyone wants them, like, pension funds buy them. They are seen as a safe haven, like a safe income. So they are seen as all of these things. So you that's what you use to manage your cash flows. Like, when investors hold cash, they don't really, like, hold money in the bank. They typically hold something like short-term securities for the government securities, like 3-month debt, 3-month government debt, and things like that, or sometimes even 10 years, depending on the kind of strategy that they are pursuing. And so, like, government debt plays an important role for investors because it allows them to store their money in something that is safe and that offers a yield. So there's the longer you hold government debt, the more income you get over the years. So, but now the problem is the more the demand increases for government debt, as it has done over the past 40 years, the lower the yield gets on that government debt. So because there's an inverse relationship between the price of a bond and the interest rates on the bond, because what happens is that the effective interest rate to you as an investor is the number of rands you get as interest paid to you every year over the price that you bought the bond at. It's not the price that it was issued at. So because bonds trade in the market and the price is set by the market. So this also influences the issuance of new government debt. If they see that the debt that is currently in the market has been traded at a particular yield by the market, so government takes that signal, and when they issue their new debt, they tend to stick close to the market yield, because obviously they want people to subscribe to the bond. And if you misprice the bond relative to the market, you're going to have an inefficiency. And so they generally try to do that. And so this has been a system that's been going well, but you can't sustain a bond bull market perpetually. Like, everyone can't just keep on buying bonds. Eventually, yield has been wiped out, like what has happened. And so it has gotten to the point where the yield on these bonds can't keep up with inflation. And so in that case, if you're a pension fund that depends on these bonds for income, it means that you are guaranteed to lose. And so this is where you see things like commodities come in. Because commodities, the good thing about commodities is that they are generally a store of value as scarce goods that you can't print. So things like land, water,
gold, oil,
grain, oil, coal, gold, platinum, like all of those things, silver, like all of those hard physical assets, things that you can't really print, that they are not that they are not someone else's liability. So there are things that are called assets, but they are really someone else's liability, like bonds and stocks. You rely on someone to pay you in order to realize the value of the assets. So land and all of these other things don't have that, and so that's why they tend to be a safe haven in times of inflation. And so because governments have so much debt on their books across the world, just everyone. It's not just governments; it's corporations, it's consumers, it's everyone. So the only way to get rid of this debt is basically to inflate it away. So basically, if
print money.
Exactly. If the interest rates, if the cost of savings in this debt is going to be less than the inflation rate, then the debt will reduce to inflation over time. That's just how it's going. That's how it works. And so that's the situation most of the world finds itself in. So because savers are always a minority, so the indebted majority has gotten into an alliance globally, and they are going to rob all of these savers and take all their money.
Yeah. So there you go, guys. If you're being frugal and you save your money, the governments around the world are just going to print money to devalue what you've saved, and they'll be able to steal from you without having to touch your bank account. They'll just devalue your money. And I mean, this is a story as old as time. I mean, like, one of the most prolific debasers of currency was King Henry VIII, who made so many wars with Scotland and France and God knows who else. And the only way he could finance it is when he started debasing his own coinage. Like, that basically means he started sneaking other metals into it. So that it wasn't pure gold or pure anything. He started sneaking some silver and a little bit of copper and maybe some iron.
That's actually an interesting point there, Gideon, because historically, the like debasement or inflation or whatever you want to call it always begins as a way to fund wars. Like that's I think 99% of the time, if you look at the historical record, it's always the motivation is always war. That's how the USA started. I mean, one of the most famous periods, inflationary periods in the US history was the US Greenback period during the Civil War. And so that's another thing. Like, they're not actually cheated because they could print all of this money, and then they made the South pay for the inflation of the war. Let's not get too controversial.
No, that's actually a very good point. And as Sean says, look, we'll try and keep it. I'll try and keep the conversation as much in ordinary English as possible, because like Mpiyakhe is an absolute master at this, and I have a bit of a clue what he says, but here's how it is going down. So I'll try and summarize, and Mpiyakhe, you interrupt me if I'm talking shit. Governments around the world know that their debt is really desirable. If it's a AAA economy, you know, if this is where the credit rating agencies come in, and if your government's debt is considered to be safe and marketable, you can almost issue as much debt instruments, which is in the form of government bonds, to investors as you want, and people will buy it. And as long as the market price of that debt is really high, you could borrow quite easily internationally to finance stuff. Now, what governments are supposed to do with this money is they're supposed to use it to finance infrastructure development and this sort of stuff, because that would mean that they would earn money in the future by encouraging economic growth through infrastructure development and pay their debts back without having too much of an issue. However, in shit economies like ours, we borrow money. We don't spend a cent of that money in infrastructure development. We borrow to pay government salaries. Was a big issue because our public sector is so massive that the taxpayers actually can't sustain it, and we were borrowing money to pay staff. That is, of course, ignoring the corruption, ignoring the theft, the graft, all the other stuff going on. And at present, we have to borrow, Mpiyakhe, unless I'm getting this wrong, we have to borrow money to pay the interest on the debt we already fucking have. So South Africa is this basket case where you are the junkie with 500 different credit cards that you're using to pay the debt on your other credit cards, but you're basically just shifting debt around in a vicious circle until someone comes to your house to break your fucking knees.
And it's not even close, Gideon. Like, it's a massive, the deficit is massive, because if you consider that 60% of tax revenue just has to pay staff. So out of your revenue, only 40% is meant to run schools, it's meant to run hospitals, it's meant to pay all of these people, like, you know, tenders, bailouts, ESCOM, SAA, all of these things. And then you're supposed to pay the interest on your debts. So it's an impossible ask.
Yeah, it's a huge stuff up. And BavZ 307, Bavs 307, sorry, I have no idea how to pronounce your screen name. I'm doing my best. Cool question. What effect does increasing the money supply have on the money multiplier? Because I can't quite remember correctly, but there are many underlying factors that theoretically... Now, what the money multiplier is, guys, just to explain from how I remember it, every cent you spend, or every rand you spend in the economy, the value of that rand isn't just 1 rand. It depends very much on the velocity of circulation, and the money multiplier effect comes into it. So you pay X amount of rand for your groceries. The people who then receive that money then use that to pay other people for other goods and services, and the cycle continues, right, as it spreads out, which means that 1 rand's worth of spending could be possibly worth 8 rand down the line. You could have a money multiplier of 2 or 8 or 12, or depending upon how dynamic your economy is, which means that that spending power of that single rand is worth way more than rand itself.
That's the basis of calculating GDP for any economy, the money multiplier. Like it's for how many cycles does money circulates in the economy, and so like how many sales, like one rand in the economy is involved, how many sales, and so on. And if you multiply all of those transactions and the value of them each, then you get the GDP for a country. So that's it's a good question. So it doesn't like what we like. There's history behind this, recent history and more distant history. Like when you look at Germany after the First World War and so on. So the history is that like when increasing monetary supply on its own is well, it's not enough to increase velocity of the money that you've pumped into the economy. Usually what happens is assets like stocks, property, and so on, they'll go up first, then bonds, obviously, because the goal of inflation is primarily to deal with government bonds. So that's all of those assets will go up, and then eventually, but most people will rather spend the money buying assets or saving it. Like depending on, like especially if you've just been through a tough economic times, like what we went through during lockdown. And so that's most people will want to save money, make sure that they are secure. But there comes a threshold, the point where people feel that they've saved enough and then they start spending. So that threshold is unpredictable because it's going to differ for every society based on the individuals in that society. So you never know when the threshold is going to be, but there will come a point, if you throw enough money at people, there will come a point where they will feel that I've saved enough now, okay, then I can start spending.
That's exactly it. So that was actually a bloody good question. And I enjoyed the answer. And by the way, guys, if we lose you or you lose us, there's no such thing as a stupid question when it comes to this. Put it in the comment section. We can read it and we can try and explain, because Mpiyakhe is highly qualified and I've got an honors degree in the shit. And even I forget how it works 90% of the time.
I wouldn't say I'm highly qualified. I'm just very interested. I'm more of a hobbyist because I'm just interested in understanding how these things work. Like if you want a real expert, you can talk to someone like Russell Lambetti. So I'm just like I'm what you call a jack of all trades. I'm interested in a lot of things.
Yeah. No, that's it. And Sliv says something that resonates with me. Do away with central banking. I'm such a fan of the sentiment. And Nzo makes a good point as well. The only way a person from government works himself out of a job is if he continues to get paid. They don't really want a job, just power and a paycheck, which is unfortunate when it comes to civil servants. More of a true.
And just talking about money in South Africa, last night I happened to be looking at old like oil reserve bank data on the they keep daily data on the value of the dollar against the rand or the rand in terms of the dollar. And if you go back initially in the 1970s, before the world went off the commodity standard, with 71 cents you could buy $1, and then it just progressively weakens. That was amazing too. If we know that all currencies weaken against gold, but the fact that our currency is also weakening against the dollar, and to this extent, to the point where we were the stronger currency and now we are the weaker currency, and we are significantly the weaker currency.
Yeah, it's not just a small lack of or depreciation value. It's quite massive.
It is.
And as far as I'm aware, just to answer Bavs's question, yes, I believe it's illegal to use use credit from one money lender to clear credit from another. But of course, the government doesn't care about it. We are working for a government that essentially is behaving fiscally irresponsibly to a criminal degree. If this was a private corporation, they'd be in prison like the executives from Enron. There is no excuse for the level of imprudence. It is actually ridiculous. It's fucking reckless trading, but it's not an enterprise. It's an entire country, and no one cares about this topic. This is the worst part. Is as you. Yeah.
The thing is, like, the problem, Gideon, is that, and this is what I've been saying the whole time, is that the problem with is like usually when it comes to these things, it's usually just like some small, like backwards country, like that misbehaves and then it suffers the consequence, like Venezuela, Zimbabwe, or Argentina. But now the whole world is loaded up on debt, so there's no clean shirts anywhere. Everyone has a dirty shirt, and so there's no one to point to except maybe, like, very few countries, like I mean, even Hong Kong, which was relatively fiscally prudent. Now, like, it's China is basically subverting liberty in Hong Kong, which comes with a whole host of other problems. So even the good fiscal examples are being undermined in other ways. So it's an interesting time, man. Like, I think it's the kind of time that requires, like, if you find yourself thinking the way that you were thinking 10 years ago, you need to examine all of your thoughts and make sure that your thinking has kept up with the times, because like we have radically different risks from 10 years ago now. Like, and a lot of these risks have just come about very suddenly, and no one tells you that these risks have just popped onto the scene. They happen, and then no one is going to inform you of these things. You sort of have to inform yourself.
That's exactly it. And to answer Alan's question, by the way, because this is actually a good one.
Yeah,
you'll see there's a trend in tyrannical governments the world over, is they hate Bitcoin. Okay, because Bitcoin it's something I was hugely skeptical about, and I did a lot of research about it, and I wrote a paper about it, and it's all publicly available. But ultimately, Bitcoin is the closest equivalent to digital gold that we have. It's bloody easy to buy and sell and trade, but you need to understand the risks of the online exchanges and fraud and that sort of stuff, and do your homework before you dip your toes into it. But apart from that, it holds the same risk as any volatile commodity out there as far as gaining or losing value is concerned. So with some added... Yeah. Hey?
Okay, I think there's just, like, that's added risk because it's new. Like, I think I think cryptocurrency has the potential to be something like the closest thing to a digital commodity that you can have out there. But I think just because it's new, it's going to be a speculation. I think that's unavoidable. If we had just discovered gold 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago, it would be a speculation. I mean, that's just because it has no market history. It's not a slander on the assets itself. Like, it's just the nature of markets that, like, speculation is actually an important part of markets. That's how you actually you sort information, filter out the information, and sort of figure out which information is important for prices. And so that's what's happening now with the cryptocurrencies. I like to use the more generic term decentralized ledger technologies, because, like, I think it reflects more of the ignorance. Like, we really don't know what's going to happen in this space. We know that's, like, there's in the basic essential idea of all of them, there's something tremendously valuable, but we don't know which of them is going to execute that vision the best. That's where that's where we need to sort of wait and see and let the market decide.
So on that decentralized ledger technology, there's something very interesting about that and the concept of firearm licenses. I'm going to touch on that in a moment.
Oh, yeah.
But so government doesn't want you to own Bitcoin because it's an easy way for you to evade them robbing you, essentially. And they don't like that. Okay. They also don't want you to own guns, and they don't want you to homeschool your children because and that's why they hate private schools as well, and private universities, is you get young people and children out of the realm of state indoctrination, where they control curriculums or curricula, they control textbooks, they control the teachers, they control all these things. In essence, our government and many governments across the world, most of them, in fact, probably, there are very few liberty-loving ones as far as I'm aware, want to, they're not just about political control, they also want as much social control as they can get away with, to make sure we're all good little slaves. And it's not a conspiracy. I mean, for fuck's sakes, the evidence speaks for itself, right?
Well, I think they just understand the nature of power. I think if you look at it, the basis, the fundamental of power, like it's always in the private sector. It's always like in voluntary groups, in like just in individuals and people who have like no market power, buying power, like people who control assets, people who don't even control assets, even like just people who have formed good networks with neighbors and things like that. That's where power lies in society. But government sort of needs to either replace, like sort of subvert those structures by replacing, placing itself in place of those structures, or it has to just destroy them completely, and then and leave people with no other alternative but the government itself. And so that's what they are involved in. And in terms of subverting structures, you can see this in South Africa with the sick, like like a relationship between trade unions and government. I mean, trade unions in South Africa were never more likable when they were against government. Like remember the good old days when trade unions were opposed to the government. Those were the likable trade unions. But now trade unions, when they are in alliance with government, I think it's just like business. I think when business is independent and doing its own thing, I think all of us like it. Like we get good services. But as soon as they get into this sort of political relationships with government, I think that's when they lose it, and then they start not serving their customers. And you can see it's happening. Like the bigger the company, which means the bigger the influence the state has on the company, the less inclined the company is to just serve customers' needs. That's why when some of the big organizations in South Africa, like you get shuttled around when you have a complaint, you phone, and then you get sent from pillar to post, and then you get sent to the receptionist, and so on and so on. And then if you look at these new, more disruptive, non-connected companies, like you get connected easily. I mean, it's like the difference between going to Capitec and maybe some of these older banks. And so this is the point. I mean, like this, just if the government is always going to want to undermine like independent sources of power, that's how it goes. And and unfortunately, they manage, because I don't think we pay attention to the right things. I mean, people on our side, I think we sort of like lose it by paying attention to the government itself, instead of paying attention to the rest of society.
Exactly. No, that's a big point, is the fact that we almost have a societal apathy towards problems that are actually really pressing important right now. And before we get to Kerry's thing, because no, I didn't watch the president earlier. I don't know if you did, Mpiyakhe.
No, I've completely lost interest. I mean, just I was so focused on what the government was doing during the lockdown. I think I am just tapped out now. Like it's
you've got fear fatigue.
Yeah, no, it's just also just fear fatigue. Also, just trying to be positive, doing what we're talking about here, which is trying to engage the rest of society rather than necessarily trying to engage the government, because the government doesn't care. The government is like is sort of seductive, because it looks seductively easy. You can just convince maybe 200 and odd some people in parliament, and then you get a policy you like, instead of having to go to millions of South Africans who, like, you don't know who represents them, you don't know what they believe in, you don't know how they are going to receive your message. That seems like a much tougher job, but then it's seductively easy because it's elusive. It's not really actually doing anything in the long run. I mean, like people celebrate, like they pretend as if the judiciary on its own is enough. But if you've lost the culture, then you lose the judiciary itself. Because what happens is that you lose control of the interpretation of the constitution. And then what's the point?
That's exactly it. And the judiciary has proven itself to not be friends of liberty in this country.
And it's because of the culture. The culture comes first. I wish people would understand this. The culture comes first. The judiciary is a product of the culture. So South Africa's problem isn't really in government and how, like, parliament itself. All of those things are products of the culture we have in South Africa. Government is not the problem. We have to talk to each other.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So we've got a lot of activist judges who think that they are siding with the so-called social good or social justice, when in fact all they're doing is they're just rubber stamping government policy against the litigants and say, oh, well, we're not going to get involved with the separation of powers, so fuck you. We either dismiss your case or we're going to rule against you with or without costs and go get. We don't care how many people we criminalize through this. Fuck you. And we've seen that a lot throughout lockdown, and lockdowns around the world, I think, have proven that governments everywhere, from United Kingdom to China to South Africa, if you give them this much of a chance to bring in authoritarian bullshit and squash their populace, they will fucking grab it with both hands, regardless of how much they claim to be liberal democracies. It's all bullshit.
No, it is. I mean, it took the flimsiest of excuses for all of them to reveal their true colors. And it's just interesting. Like, it's for me post-lockdown, like I feel at some point, like, you can try to avoid being radical to the point where you end up being ridiculous, where the facts change so much around you, and then you try to hold on to the same thing because it represents a slice of what you used to consider to be normalcy, and then you try to hold on to that even though it's become ridiculous. And for me, any support for government that's all now has just come to be ridiculous. We know that governments can act in concert. All governments across the world chose the exact same policy, which was to restrict your rights. So I don't see any, like, what's the basis for defending government now? Like, not one of them, out of 200 governments, not one of them could do the right thing. So, well, except maybe for countries like Sweden, a little bit. So yeah.
And that's before I get onto that bombshell, Vanessa, I recommend you use my personal email address, because my professional one is a bit of a fuck up. And that's my personal email. I'll just leave that up there. Sweden. I never thought in a million years I would ever go, oh, wow, the Swedes have a sensible political or social policy. Wow. And actually aggressively defend it in public. Because they were such a petri dish of shit ideas for so many years. And I mean, thanks to their immigration policies and a whole bunch of other soft cock things, they became Stockholm became the grenade attack capital of the world for the reason. Okay, the reason was all the immigrant gangs in the no-go areas got their arms and ammunition from like Eastern European and Balkan arms dealers from the old Yugoslavia. And they had so much stuff hanging around, especially hand grenades, that they kind of started bidding against each other and say, listen, cool, you buy an AK-47 and 4 full magazines and we'll throw in 2 hand grenades for free. I'm not even joking. There's an article written in The Spectator where they researched this, and I'll try and find it. So what happens is the gangs didn't want the hand grenades, but they ended up having them because they came for free with the AKs. So they started doing grenade attacks in Stockholm where they threw hand grenades into kindergartens and blocks of flats. Fortunately, the grenades were a bit shit, and the vast majority of them were dads, and very few people actually got killed, but there were a lot of injuries and stuff. That is what I associate Swedish policy with. And then they come and they're like, oh, wow, they didn't lock down, and they didn't do much worse or much better than anyone else with the deaths per million, but they did a fuck ton better economically.
Yeah. No, I think in terms of the performance against COVID, I think they were about average. Like, they weren't terrible, they weren't the best, but yeah. So that's which is actually very good. That's what you would expect. That's the expected value for any given country. And so that's good of them. And then their economy did much better than anyone else's economy. So, I mean, it paid off. I mean, Swiss can be proud of themselves. Now they have managed to maintain the value of their assets. Now they can go out into the world and buy everyone else's stuff.
Well, I was about to say they can buy Peru, because Peru is fucked. They had one of the hardest lockdowns, if not the hardest in the world, and they ended up with a destroyed economy. And they had the second highest death rate per million, just below Belgium. So they completely stuffed it up. Yeah. And just a quick shout out to Bernard, who I'm hopefully going shooting with on Wednesday if the weather doesn't go completely nuts. Thank you for always tuning into the streams. And Kerry had another. She's got good questions tonight, Mpiyakhe.
Yeah, she does. Now, does Mpiyakhe think the ANC will ever give over power in a legitimate election? It's one of those things that are risks that you have to price in. Like I don't know. Like I mean, it depends on so many factors, including like who's in power in the ANC at the time, like what kind of political pressure they are under, what state the country is in. But I would say that with the lockdown and everything that has happened, that kind of scenario has become more likely. And so I think you, as someone who's basically has to protect your savings, you have to factor that into your investment decisions because it's on you. It's not on your fund manager, so you have to adjust to these things.
Just segueing off Kerry's question, where was this one? Vanessa said, "What do we do when the courts are biased?" Beginning to think we need to overthrow the government. Well, overthrowing the government, this is a joke. State Security Agency, please don't come fucking kick down my door. Overthrowing the government is always something I'm fond of talking about. But on that note, what we do need is passive civil resistance and civil disobedience against shit and tyrannical laws. And to talk about these laws publicly, ridicule them, ridicule the politicians, attack the politicians verbally who made them, and change the laws. And this is kind of where the rest of our conversations are going a bit, Mpiyakhe, is I talked briefly about decentralized ledgers and gun control. So the initiative to license the person, register the firearm is launching next week, Monday. You've been a great help in looking over the documentation we've drafted, and a lot of your associates and friends at other liberty-loving organizations. And if they're watching this, if I can convince the RR and Free Market Foundation to endorse or support in any way, shape, or form, I would consider that a major plus, because this should be a broad civil society effort, because it's not for gun owners only. This is for every single citizen of the Republic. That's how this approach is taken. It's in your best interest to take an interest in this and to not be apathetic. But a really good way, and I had a chat to Russell Lamberti about that today, is that, strictly speaking, a gun registry should be on a decentralized register. Decentralized ledger, so that firstly, government can't fuck with it, and secondly, that criminals and corrupt activity cannot manipulate it.
Yeah. No, I think generally decentralized ledgers are a good idea if you want to secure like the integrity of information, whatever information, especially when it comes to ownership information. I think that's probably the most critical thing to like that's probably the most critical type of information to secure and to make sure that its integrity is valid, and followed by contracts, of course. And so if you can find a way, like I'm just not convinced because of the cost, because I actually tried to do something with crypto. So I tried to do something with crypto, and I wanted to see during the worst days of lockdown, I wanted to see how crypto could assist there, and I just started trialing different types of crypto, and like nothing was really practical for me. And the main issue there was like there was really no way to convert cash in your hand into crypto.
No, it takes a bit of,
without revealing your identity. There was no good way to do it.
No, there's the first step from your bank account into the exchange, and the last step from the exchange back into your bank account obviously identify you. There's a lot of anonymous transacting that can happen in the interim, and there are ways of obviously using that to protect your privacy and protect your identity. But ultimately,
So the problem I was trying to solve, let me just because what I noticed was the informal sector basically is where laws get broken. So like there's people who are trading illegally, like flouting regulations and so on. And the main reason they're able to do this, and even like not pay taxes, the main reason they're able to do that is transacting in cash. Now cash, nothing, as far as I'm concerned, nothing beats cash today. Not even gold, not crypto, nothing. Just cash. I think in terms of transacting, not as a store of value, but in terms of transacting, is the best that's available. And I think that's the threshold that crypto has to meet, because that's it sort of has to meet like crypto. If crypto was not a threat to governments, it would definitely succeed. but you know that they are going to try, like all the good things about crypto, they are going to try and suppress. You know that, so it
Oh,
has to be
absolutely.
so it,
Absolutely.
exactly. So it has to be powerful enough to overcome like a high threshold, like in the same way that cash gives. Even though cash is issued by governments, they can't really control it. They can't really control where you spend your cash, how you spend it. Like like if you go to a random store and just spend like R1 million in the store, like there's really nothing government can do about it. Like you'll be anonymous. So that's the
Uh,
beauty of cash.
do you know what the wonderful thing about crypto is, though? Is the IMF wrote a policy paper, and I think the World Bank did the same a few years ago when Bitcoin just became like a thing. And just to say, Bernard, spot on comment. I just didn't want to interrupt Mpiyakhe when he's talking so much sense. They advised strongly against governments trying to attack cryptocurrency for reasons that they didn't quite expand upon too much. But I think that they understand secretly in the hallowed halls of the World Bank and the IMF that ultimately that would be a fight that they can't win. It's too far beyond the control, and what people forget, okay, and Alan, just to come back to the gold standard, and please interrupt me if I'm talking shit, Mpiyakhe. The gold standard was broken by World War One.
Yes.
The war was so expensive
Yeah.
that governments had to leave the gold standard in order to finance their war debt.
And
then it kind of came back as the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was the US dollar became, the gold price became a function of the US dollar. So it was a pseudo gold standard in the sense that
it's called a gold exchange standard. So basically,
Yes.
gold was for the settlement of international transactions only, not of domestic US transactions. So like all domestic transactions were settled in that particular country's fiat currency, but international transactions were settled in gold at a fixed price to the US dollar.
Yeah, that's it. So, and Bretton Woods got because the dollar was just an avatar for gold then, basically. Bretton Woods was broken by the Vietnam War's debts.
Yeah.
So the reason why we don't have a gold standard or a pseudo gold standard or anything of the like anymore is because governments like war so fucking much that they not only bankrupt their own countries and nations and make generations of kids pay off debts that they never made. Well, the kids that survive the war, let's not forget, you get sent to war by a government. You either don't come back because you're fucking dead, or you come back crippled or mentally and emotionally scarred or otherwise okay. If you come back alive from the war, you will be working for the rest of your life to pay your government's debt for sending you to war in the first place. And they will break your monetary system if the war is expensive enough. This is why governments are evil, and this is why I'm an anarchist, just putting that out there. So, Mpiyakhe, what do you think about
Yeah, it's I think it has the potential to do very well in the election. It's I think it's one of those parties like I think a lot of people after Mashaba, like if it doesn't make any major mistakes, a lot of people are going to look back and say, why didn't we think of that? Like a lot of people who want to gain power in South Africa, because he has hit on something that has been obvious for a long time, which is a missing hole in our politics. So it has been obvious that there's this missing hole for a long time, and he's the only one who thought, hey, maybe someone should try and fill that. So I guess it's his entrepreneurial thinking, like where there's a gap, he wants to go and take it. And it's actually a smart effort. I looked at the research they did when they were still the People's Dialogue, and they did a lot of sophisticated data analysis, looking at Twitter and filtering information from social media and extracting useful insights from social media. So I think a lot of people might potentially underestimate them, and they're going to be shocked if they do that. So I think So there's that, but I just think I can't be excited. Like I think it has the potential to be a huge disappointment as well. I mean, like how many times have we had people say like good things, and then they go into power, and then and I mean this guy. This is the same guy that abandoned all his principles when he went into Johannesburg and had to govern with the consent of the EFF. So I don't know why people think he's going to change all of a sudden and not do that anymore. So I don't know. So let's see.
Here's the thing, guys. Yeah, Herman Mashaba isn't a businessman. He's a politician. Politicians are awful things. All of them are, well, the vast majority. There's maybe a handful. I know a handful of politicians who I'm friends with who do not fit the bill, but they are such a small minority that they would not take offense to me tarring the entire profession as a bag of snakes. Now, I like snakes. I think they're cool animals, reptiles, but they're cold-blooded, they're venomous. You don't see the fuckers until you step on them, and they have a high prey drive. So,
well, I also have friends who are politicians, but I mean, like, there's just like we have to be honest, man. Politicians are not like the rest of us. Like, they have completely different incentives. Like they want, like, they like there's just this, even like the best of them try to, like, at least be a little bit aware of this drive for power. But I think even the best of them, they have this drive for power, which is just like off-putting. It's like, it's very hard to see that someone really like has this tremendous amount of self-belief that's like, the other people need to be coerced by them in order to live better lives. Like it's just, yeah. So that's, but yeah, like, some of them are not as bad, but yeah, all of them are bad.
Yeah, no, that's the thing, and all of them are. Remember, they're vote maximizing agents, guys. That's the official definition of a politician: is they are vote maximizers. So they will do whatever they can. Now, a few of them might try to maximize votes by solid policy, but most of them will maximize votes by trying to tell you what they think you want to hear. And
there's actually a pragmatic, like, justification. If you are just a guy who doesn't want to work, who wants to just tax people and have them fund your lifestyle, the best thing to do is to have a free market, to have a reasonable amount of taxation, and just allow people to do what they do is best, and they just take like a little off the top, and whatever, like if you're taking 2% of the economy at any given time, that will grow because we're taking so little. That 2% will become a bigger and bigger over time, and then you will. So that's what, like, if you just wanted to be lazy and get free money, that's what you should be doing. So like some politicians, I think in Western countries, they realize this, and so they just they choose relatively free markets, and then that's what they use to fund the welfare states and so on. So I like African politicians haven't caught on to this. It's actually the best way to be a politician, because like you get all of the credit, you do none of the work, and you get paid, and the economy grows and everyone is happy. So
that's it. That's exactly it. So you can ride on your successes, even if they're few and far between. You just obfuscate your failures completely.
Exactly.
Sean makes an interesting comment. Now, we weren't on the gold standard in 1994. What we did do back then is our entire economy was over-reliant on the mining and export of gold. That was a disproportionately large driver of our economic activity, and the apartheid regime used a lot of that export money to fund the state security apparatus from the mid-70s to like 1989, 1990, with the war in Angola and, well, in Southwest Africa and all that. So essentially what happened to the rand is, as gold exports declined and became less important, and as our politics steadily got worse after Mpiyakhe, there was no confidence in our currency, and there was no fucking reason. And also South Africa, we're an interesting case of Mpiyakhe, where we became a kind of a net importer of goods as opposed to net exporter, in the sense of we don't manufacture stuff we consume domestically so much.
We used to be a net exporter, actually, when in those days, to speak of, when, like, we were producing a lot of gold, and so we used to be a net exporter. And I think a part of it, like, if you look at the actual mineral reserves South Africa has, we still have quite a lot of minerals. I think a lot of it is just like the incentives for investment. I think that's been the big change, the incentives for investment in the mining sector in particular. Like I think the incentives have just become like harder and harder, and the savings base of the country has reduced dramatically. If you look at any chart from the 70s up to now, the savings base has reduced. So that makes obviously that there's much less capital available to open new mines and so on. So all yeah, all of those things have to be. But also, like you must remember as well, the South African rand, like all currencies under the Bretton Woods gold exchange system, was exchangeable for a fixed amount of US dollars before 1971 when America went off the gold standard, obviously.
Exactly.
So all of them were fixed. So there was a fix. You would get you would give them your 71 cents, and then you would get $1 back in return. That was fixed. That was an invariable until America went off the gold standard and everything was floating then. And so that's that. So all of those forces, the reduction in savings, the change in the policy environment, the reduction in exports, and so on, all of those factors have combined to weaken the rand over time. So it's all of those things, and like it's unfortunate because South Africa, like in terms of where we are, should really be one of the best places to live on the continent.
It should be. And I mean, we've got the human capital. We do have the best developed infrastructure on the continent. We have a huge amount going for us, and we're squandering it. And I think that's a simple example of that. And I'm not a big sports fan at all. And by the way, the comments are really good, guys. I'm just going to pop a few of them on the screen as I roll past. Big Daddy Liberty is an awesome human being. Bafana hasn't won an African Cup of Nations since the late 90s. Yeah. We've got the biggest talent pool to draw from, the most developed one, definitely in Africa. Well, in sub-Saharan Africa at least. Yeah. There's no reason we shouldn't be dominating in soccer, but we're not, because it's a mismanaged fucking mess. Yeah. And our politics are terrible, which means the sports are terrible where the interference is high, which translates into the bigger economy.
And for me, like the core of the problem is really just just societal issues. It's not so much this politics. It's just so much like some of the ideas and like the emotions that dominate in society, like this sense of being wrong, this sense of needing to sort of exact vengeance for what happened to people. You know what I mean, man? Like there's just this thing that you can't, like there's just this thing that you really can't argue against. It's more of a feeling. It's like people feel like this is like it's pain. People are expressing the pain that they felt over what happened to apartheid, but then in expressing that pain is leading, they're making decisions that are creating a lot of other negative consequences and creating more pain for us in the future. And Johnny, it just becomes a never-ending cycle. And I just what people need to understand, when we say that, we need to maybe talk a little less about apartheid in the past. We're not saying it was not painful. It was not. We're just saying at some point we have to start seizing the future and just doing those things that are necessary to make sure that every South African child is growing up now has a bright future, because we can't tolerate this condition of being poor perpetually. Ever since I've been born, Gideon, we've always been a poor country. The townships have always been the townships. The informal settlements have always been the formal settlements. The only thing that has changed is that the richest areas have become poorer and poorer over time. So that's if you just look at Johannesburg CBD, you know what I mean. So that's
exactly. The urban decay is real. It's very real, and you can see it around the corners. And I'm afraid of what lockdown has done to this economy, because it's shocking. I mean, I drove around the neighborhood the other day, and I mean, I got to an intersection where there used to be one maximum. It's a big intersection. Used to be one maximum, two beggars at this intersection back in the day. Now there is 3 beggars per traffic light, which means the same intersection now houses about 12 beggars. It's a fuck up. It is like, and this is, and a lot of them are relatively well dressed still. And you can see they're recently out of work, and they've got no other way of paying their bills. They're begging at streetlights. Some are probably a restaurant or hospitality staff or something like that. They're not necessarily uneducated or unskilled. It's just they have now been reduced to begging in the streets to stay alive.
Yeah.
The impoverishment of our nation is fucking real, and it's scarily so.
And what I like, and they were warned. They were like, we warned them about the consequences of this lockdown. They were warned, and there were also a lot of people from both sides, the left and the right, and everywhere, who were warning them about this. I mean, a lot of good articles came from Ground Up, The Conversation, and other publications which are more on the left. And also people like on more on the pro-liberty side, people like yourself, John, Dumo, Denga, and other folks like at the Free Market Foundation, the IRR, the ASA, and so on. So a lot of people warned. So it wasn't like it wasn't one. So that's the sad thing, is to see the country collapse in front of your eyes, and then you've tried. So so what can you do, man? Like, it was unfortunately, it was predictable, but we've decided to go through the pain. So what can we do, man? Like, it's in my opinion, there are very few options now. Like, we've come to a point where everyone has to be on the fence. Like, everyone has to stop being on the fence. Like, you have to make a decision now on which side you fall, because the things have become critical. There's no longer any luxury of waiting, and I think you are going to see it with the speed with which things are going to start to change. Like, it's going to seem insane. Because like when under conditions of high stress, high pressure, and high stress like this, society tends to change relatively quickly. And it's like I don't think we've really ever experienced this. Maybe in 1994, and I think we are in that kind of situation now.
Fantastic. That's exactly it. We need this awakening. We need more people to get involved. We need a forward-looking approach to life, not a backward-looking rearview mirror. Someone once said to me, South Africa is a country that's driving down the freeway, but it ignores the windshield and it's driving looking only in the rearview mirror, which means you can't really go anywhere. Yes. Mpiyakhe is at the Free Market Foundation. They do awesome work. Follow him on Twitter. I've linked all this stuff in the description below the YouTube video. And he's been literally, he's a big friend of gun owners. He's a big friend of liberty. He's helping me with this license the person register the farm thing, which I'm going to talk about more tomorrow and this week. And it's launching on Monday on DRSA. Thank you to everyone with your super chats over all my streams. We'll do more of these in a bit. But Mpiyakhe, is there anything specifically you'd like to end off as we get to the 1 hour mark that a thought that you'd like to leave people with? It can be as long as you want.
Well, in the same way that countries can form alliances and coalitions, we saw with lockdown, all of them had an alliance against the rest of us, the population of the world, basically to take away our liberties and freedoms. So that's in the same way. I think we need to start thinking about alliances among ourselves as individuals and as different voluntary groups working together and so on. And it needs to start. I think it needs to start small, maybe at the municipal level, maybe just at the street level, like people who live on the same streets with people in the same community, the same municipality. And then we engage in a continuous process of talking to each other and sort of like, building local solutions to problems and stop referring to the people on top of us. I mean, it's no use. Like, for me, it doesn't make any sense. You have a problem in a community, someone has a solution, but then some dead guy who doesn't, like, is not affected by the problem at all, does not live in this community, tells you that the solution is illegal and then you should stop it immediately. Yep. Even though everyone in the community is benefiting from this. So I think that needs to be stopped, and it's something that we need to overcome as South Africans, because our problems, like the solutions to our problems are within us. There's no reform that Ramaphosa is going to do, that like the people in the ANC are not going to do any work to fix this country. It's always been on us. It's always going to be on us. They will never allow us. They will never give us the freedom, the space to do what we need to do to save the country and save our pensions and everything else and save our futures. But what we will have to take back that power, and it's going to be uncomfortable. People are going to be arrested. So that's the kind of time we are in. And I think people have to ask themselves if they are ready for that. Because if you're not, it's fine, because the risk is not for everyone. Like if you can find a plan B, like I know countries like Botswana, maybe Rwanda, who knows? So like, just I think everyone has to think for themselves.
Awesome. That's it. And I like that. People take control of your destiny. Pick a line, pick a fight, get involved. Subscribe to people who you associate with and make them your voice. Give their voice power, give their voice reach. My voice only has power and reach because you helped me to get it out there. That's basically it. All of us are heavily dependent on people who subscribe to us, support us, and who believe in what we're saying to make sure the word gets out there. And ultimately, that's the way that we influence what's going on in the bigger society. Thank you all for tuning into this tonight. It's been an awesome discussion with you, Mpiyakhe. I'm definitely going to have you on again.
Yeah. Glad to come back, man. Yeah.
And we are going to do this again. So I'm just going to say cheers to everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Live stream with you again on Wednesday.